Hi folks, and welcome to the Meaningful Money Podcast. This is Season 15, Episode 9. This is the podcast dedicated to helping you put your finances in order. My name is Pete Matthew, and I'm going to share with you everything you need to know and everything you need to do to secure your financial future. I'm here to help you make sense of money. Here we are, once again. Great to have you with me. Thank you for joining me. Experienced investors need to understand leverage in all its forms. And today, we're going to be talking about what it means to apply leverage. We're going to talk about what it actually is as well, but what it means to apply it to your wealth building. Okay, important subject. After the main body of the show, as usual, I'll read a review that's been left. At least one thing to announce again, not for the first time, but at least one thing to announce. So stay tuned for that as well. Before we get going, though, remember this podcast continues to be brought to you with the help of my friends at 7 Investment Management. They've been helping me out here since the beginning of the podcast and since episode 100 of the videos, right back in spring of 2011. So thank you so much to those guys for helping me out. Really couldn't have done this without them. They're on 7im.co.uk, the number 7im.co.uk. So definitely check out what they're up to there. And also don't forget the Meaningful Money branded self-investment platform, meaningfulmoney.tv/podcastinvest for all the information about how you could invest on that platform. Okay? Brilliant. Okay, well, it's fair to say, I think, that leverage is misunderstood. Maybe you're listening to this and you don't know what that even means. Don't worry, we're going to explain in due course. But I think to say it's misunderstood is probably putting it mildly, actually. I even confession time, to being possibly a little bit too quick to dismiss the whole idea of leverage in the past, probably because of my own too narrow understanding of what it really means. So I want to sort of explore the concept today and offer some suggestions as to how you might apply it to further accelerate your own wealth building success. Okay, worth mentioning right at the start actually, teeth in, right at the start. There will be a season-ending Q&A like there is at the end of every season. That'll be the last Wednesday before Christmas, if memory serves. But I need your questions for that, okay? It's only a Q&A with your cues. So season 15 at meaningfulmoney.tv is a great place to send me your questions to answer in the season-ending Q&A. Season 15 at meaningfulmoney.tv. Also, notes, links and stuff from today's show, meaningfulmoney.tv/pp9. That's really the only link you need to remember today. meaningfulmoney.tv/pp9. Let's have a look at what you need to know first about leverage. Okay, number one, leverage is misunderstood and consequently it's underused, even ignored. So as I just said just now, I think I've misunderstood leverage for many years. Obviously, I understood the concept, but I've kind of studiously avoided the subject here because of my own sketchy understanding about how to apply it practically. So what exactly does it mean to apply leverage? Well, if you think back to early physics lessons, okay, some of you experienced a cold shiver down your spine at the thought of physics lessons. But you remember that a lever and a fulcrum allow larger masses to be moved by a smaller effort. So, put simply, using a lever amplifies input force to provide a greater output force. There's a famous quote which is attributed to Archimedes, and he said, "Give me a lever long enough and a fulcrum on which to place it, and I shall move the world." In personal finance terms, applying leverage usually means borrowing money to put to work in some way. Most often that's taking out a mortgage to buy a property, right? But it doesn't just have to mean that. I mentioned last week tax relief, an employer match into pensions. That's a form of leverage, if you like. You're using somebody else's money to move more quickly towards your goals. That kind of leverage doesn't have to be paid back either, which is one reason it's so important to maximize the use of those benefits, tax relief and employer match, right? So that's what financial leverage is, essentially. It's using other people's money to accelerate your returns. Crucial thing to know, absolutely essential. If you remember nothing else in this episode, this is what you need to remember. Financial leverage amplifies both gains and losses. It amplifies both gains and losses. let's illustrate this with an example. Okay, let's say you've got £10,000 to invest. You could invest that money in the stock market, and over time it's going to grow. You buy 10 grand worth of shares in a multi-asset fund, say, you get a decent return. Maybe you double your money in 10 years, say. Not too shabby, all right? But let's say you take that £10,000 and instead use it as a deposit to buy a house worth £100,000. You borrow 90 grand on an interest-only mortgage. The rent from the property pays the mortgage and all the other costs, and the property doubles in value over the same 10-year period. Nice and convenient, right? So you now own a £200,000 property, still got a 90 grand mortgage on it because it was interest only. Your £10,000 deposit has now turned into £110,000 worth of equity in that property. And that's an incredible difference, right? 10,000 quid becomes 20 grand without leverage, just invested in funds or whatever. But it becomes £110,000 with leverage. Very cool, right? Because you've bought a bigger asset, it grows, proportionally larger. And so your bit ends up bigger as a result. Very cool. So how might that same leverage amplify potential losses? Well, if your £10,000 fund investment goes down, the only thing you've lost is your own money, and then only when you sell, remember. But if you borrow 90 grand to buy that house, and then there's a housing crash, say, the property suddenly ends up being worth 80,000. Maybe you can't sell it at all for a time being. Well, you've got a major problem. Not only have you, lost your original £10,000, but you've lost 10 grand of somebody else's money as well. You don't have anything now with which to pay back the debt. You can't sell the property, still paying interest on the mortgage. You're minus 100% of your initial stake because the property is now only worth 80 grand. You still owe 90. You've essentially lost two lots of your original 10,000. So even though the property has lost, 20% of its value, you have lost 100%, actually 200%. You've lost twice your original stake. So leverage allows you to buy more or bigger assets on which the growth potential is correspondingly larger, but so is the loss potential. We can't minimize that, okay? Let's go big, right? You borrow £1 million. You find somebody happy to lend you that. If you do, then let me know who they are. You borrow £1 million and you invest it in the stock market. Your money doubles, let's say 20 years this time, right? You use the dividends payable by your investments to pay down the loan over that period. Let's just say it's gone. You've paid £1 million loan back over 20 years, right? You have £2 million worth of shares now. You have no loan, right? You've used somebody else's money to build a £2 million portfolio. You didn't put anything down. You just borrowed £1 million. It's doubled in value. You've paid off the £1 million in loans. Job's a good one, okay? But if you buy shares in a company and that company folds, you're not back to zero. You're minus £1 million owed to whoever your gullible lender is. So, folks, in order to make best use of leverage, you need to invest wisely using the money that you borrow. And you need to carefully manage the downside risk. It's so important that, I'm going to say it again, in order to make the best use of leverage, you need to invest wisely using any money that you borrow, and you need to manage the downside risk very carefully. Third thing you need to know, I'm just going to go over Todd Tressider's 6 forms of leverage. I interviewed Todd of financialmentor.com back in episode 296. There's a link in the notes to that. And I've reread his excellent book, The Leverage Equation, in prepping for this episode. And in that book, he talks about 6 forms of leverage, of which financial leverage is the first. And that's the sort of borrowing money to invest, essentially. That's financial leverage. The other 5 are as follows. Time leverage. We only have so many hours in the day. There's no way we can make more time. So making the best use of that limited resource is essential, obviously. And we do that by using other people's time, leveraging other people's time to make more than 24 hours available to us in each day. We essentially borrow other people's time. Technology leverage. We can use technology to speed up tasks that might otherwise take us time and effort to achieve, thereby, again, freeing up more time for us to do more productive things. Experience and knowledge leverage. We can't possibly know or do everything. There'll always be people who are better at a certain task or more knowledgeable in a given area than we can ever be. So being able to tap into other people's expertise, that's a really valuable form of leverage. Again, if you're listening to me now, right, you're listening to me, and so you're leveraging my 20-odd years of experience in personal finance, and you're improving your own knowledge as a result. Anybody who's ever asked a question or sought a recommendation on Facebook has also made use of this form of leveraging. You're leveraging the sort of hive mind of the community. Social media tools make that more possible and more frictionless, if you like, than it's ever been before. So experience and knowledge leverage. Communications and marketing leverage. If we're in business, there are tools available now that allow us to reach far more people than has ever been possible. The very fact that you're listening to some random Yorkshireman living in Cornwall talking about money proves this point, I think, right? Incredible reach I have to say that I'm basically standing in a cupboard, okay? Network and relationship leverage, finally. Having a network of friends and contacts enables us to reach and benefit from their own networks, thereby increasing our own reach, right? And the potential benefit to us of doing that. So I want to talk about how to use the first four of those. So that's financial leverage, time leverage, technology leverage, and experience and knowledge leverage. I want to talk about how to use those to improve your financial situation. The last two, which are communications and marketing leverage, network and relationship leverage, I think those are a bit more specific to those who are in business. That might not apply to everybody. So for those, I'm going to suggest that you read Todd's book, The Leverage Equation. Link to that in the show notes. Okay, so let's apply the different kinds of leverage to our own wealth building efforts. Let's look at what you need to do. Okay, so the first thing you need to do is to consider financial leverage, but be careful, okay? By far, the most common form of financial leverage is mortgaging for investment property purchase. Most folks listening to this will understand how it works. The benefit of property, of course, is that it's tangible. You can stand inside a property and run your hands along the walls. It's physical. That's why it's the easiest form of leverage to get. There's very little risk to the lender, really, when their money is secured on a physical property, and they can, of course, take that property off you at any time if you don't meet the terms of the loan. Now, I don't invest in property myself, at least not yet, but I'm certainly not averse to the idea. And let's face it, it'll take you a long time to save enough to buy a property, an investment property, any property, outright. So borrowing makes sense. Just be aware of the following factors. I suggest you reduce your risk as you go along by using the income received by an investment property you have to reduce the loan outstanding. Most buy-to-let investors take out interest-only loans and don't pay them down, instead relying on increasing property prices to free up more equity. They then borrow against that equity to release a deposit for the next one. They borrow more to buy that one, and that's all fine, but please don't over-leverage yourself. If I was doing this, I would be paying down the debt as I went along. Now, financially, that might not stack up, okay? It may, money is still relatively cheap, so it might make sense to keep borrowing and keep leveraging, but don't overdo it, right? I've had conversations with potential clients who have come to me. They've got millions of pounds worth of property and millions of pounds worth of debt attached. So all very well if on paper you've got £500,000 worth of equity, but releasing equity means that you have to sell houses, and that might not come as easily as you think, and always incurs costs, quite significant ones as well. So if you're going to be a property investor, go slowly, build slowly and carefully, and try to keep a healthy debt-equity ratio. I see far too many people cutting it way too fine, and it just has echoes of 2008, when pretty much anybody could get a mortgage to borrow investment, to buy investment properties. It just worries me a little bit. So keep a healthy debt-to-equity ratio. I'm not going to say what that is because it's different for everybody, but if it was me, I wouldn't be going anything over, say, 60% debt to equity, 60% debt, 40% equity. I wouldn't go more than that, but that is just me. So be comfortable in your own skin, right? Let's consider another example. You own your own home worth £500,000, all right? And you've got a mortgage of just 50,000 on it. okay, and you discover that you can borrow another £250,000 on a mortgage on your home at a really low interest rate, let's call it 2.5% fixed for 5 years. So should you borrow that money? Should you take it out of your home? Now you've got a 300 grand mortgage, okay? Interest rate is low though. Should you borrow that money and invest it in the stock market? Right? Now again, mathematically, this makes sense. Probably you can get an average of 6 to 7% per year on a stock market investment if you invest reasonably aggressively, possibly more. But you know this return won't come in a straight line. Markets are volatile. So assuming you can afford the repayments on the higher mortgage, you could put that money to good use. Assuming you keep your job, so you can continue repaying the mortgage, and that you invest in liquid, easily sellable investments, then on paper, this strategy makes sense, doesn't it? So remember I said earlier that using leverage effectively is about investing wisely and managing downside risk. So how might that work in this example? Well, I'd be investing that borrowed money in super low cost funds, right? I'm not throwing money away on costs. I would consider using any yield that I got from that investment to reduce the debt as I went along. So any dividend payments or whatever, using it to reduce the debt. For sure, I'd be taking out income protection insurance, right? So that I know I could pay the mortgage even if I couldn't work. Imagine the difficulty I could get into if I had to quit work due to illness. Markets happened to be down at the time. The investments could be worth less than I'd borrowed at that point. So I wouldn't necessarily want to sell them down, but I might have to if I no longer had a salary. I'd also be keeping a very close eye on any tax liability, any sort of latent capital gains tax liability perhaps, if the investments rose and then I needed to sell them. I would be managing that capital gains tax liability as I went along by selling down and rebuying other assets each year. Now, if the maths works out, you make more money than you pay in interest on the loan, if you've managed the downside risk, then this is something I would consider. But I reckon only a handful out of every 1,000 people listening to this should even remotely consider this in practice. I'll give you a real life example. I've got a client who has a facility on his mortgage. It allowed him to borrow an extra 300 grand at an incredible interest rate of 0.97%, fixed for the life of the loan. Right? Quite how he'd managed to wangle this, I've no idea. So it was a kind of a drawdown facility on his mortgage, 0.97% fixed. He drew down 300,000. He's invested that money in low-cost, highly liquid investments. We're managing his capital gains liability as he's going along. He's got significant other wealth, crucial point, and so it totally makes sense for him to do that. Most of us are not in that position. For reference, that 300 grand that he's borrowed is less than a tenth of his net worth. Net worth probably around about 5 million. So, it's almost a satellite investment. If he has to sell down, even if he had to sell down at a loss, wouldn't be an issue. Okay? Most of us are not in that position. For me, in my personal position right now, I would not borrow on my mortgage to invest, even though the maths might stack up. So please, folks, be careful. Really consider the downsides of borrowing to invest in any form, property or otherwise. Make provision to manage the downsides, and if the maths still stacks up, and if you've got the kind of temperament that means you won't lose sleep over it, then don't be too quick to discount financial leverage. Perhaps don't be as quick to discount it as I have done so in the past. As with everything financial, it's important to be what? Intentional about these things. Think it through, go into it with your eyes open, full understanding of the risks and careful management of those downside risks. Quick checklist for you to see whether financial leverage might work. Does the maths stack up? That is, can you borrow at a lower rate than the likely growth of the asset you want to buy, assuming a sort of conservative rate of return, okay? Can you use the yield or returns from the investment to reduce the debt over time, thereby reducing your risk? Can you cope with the added risk that leverage brings in return for that added growth? Do you have the temperament for it, in other words? Can you mitigate the downside risk in some way, for example, by taking out some insurance, as in my example earlier? Can you unwind the position very quickly without cost or significant tax implications? Is the proposed borrowing and investment a reasonable proportion of your whole wealth, like my client that borrowed that 300 grand from his mortgage facility, probably about 7% of his net worth. That's all. Okay, so if the answer to all or most of those is yes, then do consider financial leverage to accelerate your wealth building. But if not, then you should probably steer clear. I hope that's helpful. Second thing you need to do is to use time leverage. So I'm going to quote Todd's book here, The Leverage Equation. The goal of time leverage is to release your income growth from the boundaries of time. So I had a conversation recently with someone who was complaining about her husband's low pay, right? He wasn't there. She was complaining about her new husband's low pay. So I suggested, well, you could get a lot done between the hours of, say, 7 p.m. after they'd had dinner and midnight before he has to go to bed and get up to do another day. You can get a lot done. Maybe set up a side hustle to earn some more money. Turns out that he spends quite a lot of time gaming in the evenings and isn't likely to give that up. That's fair enough. How he spends his own time is his own prerogative. But then I asked her about what she does with that time. And she says, well, she spends a lot of time doing other tasks around the house. She's ironing and cleaning, all that sort of stuff, after she's done a full day's work. So we'll leave perhaps comments about division of labour there to other people. I'm not a marriage counsellor, but I suggested that perhaps because she does have the energy, she does have the drive to maybe set up a side hustle and earn more money, that maybe she pays somebody else to do some of those more mundane tasks around the house to free up that time in the evenings to set up and build a side hustle. Delegation is a key way that you can maximize the use of your own time. So, for instance, I act as advisor to plenty of entirely capable people. They could and do easily look after every aspect of their finances themselves, but many of them have got to the point where it's easier to pay somebody else to do that in order to free up time to put their own skills to better use, right? So ask yourself, how can you do the same? How can you free up more time to concentrate on your own journey towards FI? Can you pay someone to do the ironing or the cleaning, thereby freeing yourself up to make money in some way? Right, I've done an entire series on ways to make money back in season 12, so I'll make sure there's a link to the first episode in that series in the show notes. I've discovered the power of this form of leverage in handing over various aspects of the creation of the Meaningful Money content to the man, the legend that is Kawayan, who many of you will know from the Facebook group. For years, I only really had the time and the energy to create the content, the videos or the podcast for Meaningful Money. But there's an awful lot more to building than just putting out the content. You have to reach people, right? So what Cal has done is that he's helped me create a social media strategy. He takes the scripts and picks out the key messages from each episode. He creates the graphics, the video GIFs, all the stuff that we share on the various channels. He's scheduling those messages to Instagram and Facebook and LinkedIn and Twitter and all that sort of stuff. And he helps me in a million other ways. I do hesitate to call Cal leverage because that sort of dehumanizes him a little bit, and he's a lot more than that to me. He's become a good friend. But essentially, that's what's going on here. He is freeing up my time to create more stuff, which means more income. I mean, Meaningful Academy simply wouldn't have happened without Cal. Right? That's why I've cut him in, right? Because it wouldn't have happened at all without him. So why wouldn't I pay him a proportion of the revenue from that? I am paying him to enable me to do that stuff, and it's just worked brilliantly. So Cal, you're a star. Thank you, mate. I know you're watching this before anybody else will. So give it some thought. How might you free up time to create the space to improve your own wealth? There's lots of ways you can do it. Number 3, use technology leverage. We live in incredibly privileged times. We have access to amazing tools which enable efficiencies in pretty much every aspect of our lives. We can ask a certain digital assistant to set a timer for us when we're cooking, saves us the 30 seconds it takes us to wash and dry our hands, pull out our phones and set the timer ourselves. I've saved an incredible amount of time by moving increasingly towards seeing my clients via Skype or Zoom video. My fuel bill is reduced by 2/3, thereby making me a little bit more wealthy, right? I kid you not. I rarely leave the office for client meetings now. Many of them now come in to see me, but the majority are conducted online via video, not least because most of my clients these days are way distant from Penzance. But that's the very definition of leveraging technology to increase our wealth. It's enabled me to take on more clients, more diverse clients, freed up the time to do that. When it comes to a direct impact on our wealth building, we've talked many times in the past about using budgeting tools like YNAB or the built-in tools in some of the challenger banks like Starling and Monzo to help with the basics of money management. Tools which round up spending and save the difference, between the £1.67 you spend on something, it'll save the, cheapest mental arithmetic, 33 pence, into a savings pot, and it'll do that every time you make an expenditure. It'll round it up and save that money. They're a great way of leveraging technology to save little bits of money often, and surprising how much it builds up. I use Evernote, brilliant app, to make sure that I don't forget anything. And for scanning and saving documents I might need to refer to, any notes I make in Evernote. I run both my businesses on Asana, which is a task and project management app, so I can assign tasks to team members, track completion of those tasks. I use SaneBox to clear up the insanity, which is my email inbox, and my new favorite is Shift, which is an app which combines a whole load of other apps and systems into one window. Text Expander saves me from typing the same things over and over again. What I do with the time saved is key though, right? I could save an awful lot of time with these tools only to waste that watching YouTube. But I've taken on more new clients in the past year than in the previous 4 years combined, thanks in no small part to some of these tools and also time leverage by hiring employees. More new clients equals more income, and as long as I keep an eye on the profit margin, so I'm not just ramping up costs, then I'm a winner. So what tools might you use to improve your own wealth? Could you start a blog using free online tools, make money that way? Could you use a budgeting app to help you manage your money? Could you use an online platform to automate your investing? Look for ways to create efficiencies that then free up time and resources to put to use on your own journey towards FI. Just be careful not to waste that time. Finally, number 4, use experience and knowledge leverage. Okay, I touched on this a little bit, mentioning Cal earlier. Not only is he freeing up my time by doing stuff that I could do myself, he's bringing a level of expertise in his field that I can only aspire to. So I'm leveling up what I do by making use of his skills. As I mentioned earlier, you're leveraging my experience and expertise by listening to this show and applying what you're learning. You are applying it, right? There's a podcast now for every possible subject you can imagine. Listening to podcasts in otherwise dead time, you're exercising expertise, technology, and time leverage. Get you. Amazing. Again, Todd Tressida quote, "Knowledge is the foundation of all wealth-generating processes." Maybe you can also leverage your own expertise to make money. Maybe you can create a blog, a video, or podcast series to share what you know to help others. You'll be giving a lot of it away for free. Actually, you should give it all away for free, but people will look for ways to repay you. I've lost count of people who have emailed to say that they bought my book or even joined Meaningful Academy to, in their own words, repay me for all the free content over the years. That's amazing, and I'm very grateful. Thank you, folks. But is there a way that you could do the same? Either you can use other people's knowledge to leverage your way to increase and accelerate success, or you can leverage your own knowledge and the incredible power of the internet to build more and greater wealth for yourself and your family. I could go on, right? This is a subject that I'm particularly keen on. I wanted to deal specifically with financial leverage, which has got unique properties we need to be mindful of. But I think we've gone further than that. Again, sometimes I start writing these and end up going in a completely different direction to what I thought when I started. There are now more easily accessible ways to access all different kinds of leverage than there ever has been, thanks to the internet. So take some time and look at how you might apply some of these yourself, and definitely pick up a copy of Todd's book, The Leverage Equation. It's been super useful to me in writing this episode, but it's really given me some food for thought as well. So link to that in the notes. Okay, hope that was helpful. Here's a review from Mike Borello, no headline, but he says, "This podcast has changed my way of thinking about money and my future. Pete provides not only the theory, but also the actions you can take to own your financial well-being. He teaches you how to make small, practical steps to achieve your financial freedom. As a millennial, I first thought perhaps I was jumping the gun by thinking about these things so early, but the series on millennials has given me confidence. There are others thinking about it too. Recommend this podcast to everyone I meet, young and old. Please keep it going, Pete." Mike, you're a star, mate. Thank you so much, firstly, for recommending the show to everybody you meet. I really appreciate that. But also for leaving me a review. It's super helpful. Thank you. meaningfulmoney.tv/iTunes. That's what Mike did. But wherever you're listening to this, just leave me a review if you can. It really helps. Even just a rating. Don't have to actually type anything. It definitely helps keep the show near the top of the rankings. Okay, don't forget, we got a meetup going on the 8th of November at 7 p.m. in a pub, Wetherspoons pub, called the Cross Keys. It's Cross with an E on the end, right? Cross Keys. It's in the City of London, just opposite the entrance to Leadenhall Market. 7 p.m. Friday the 8th of November. Myself and Damien and Andy and the gang from Money to the Masses will just be hanging out in the pub. Come and join us. No agenda, nothing formal, just a bunch of mates hanging out in a pub, having a drink and chewing the fat. It'd be great to see you there. 7 p.m. Friday the 8th of November, the Cross Keys in the City of London. Okay, next time we're going to be talking about diversification and what that really means for folks in the planning with purpose stage of their life. Looking at maybe other ways to diversify your wealth building approach, and crucially asking the question whether or not it's even necessary to diversify and to what degree. Okay, remember, questions or comments on today's show, do that at the show notes. That's meaningfulmoney.tv/pp9 for Planning with Purpose episode 9. Any questions and comments, you can do that. That's it for this session. Hope you found it useful. Let me know what you think. meaningfulmoney.tv/pp9. Hope you enjoyed it, folks. Thank you so much for listening and for your ongoing support, getting great feedback about this season. Have a great week, and I'll see you next week.